Greetings, students. Today I want to chat with you about some of the new literacies that we are going to need to work with our communities on relating to AI tools for student research or research in general for any of our patrons. So let's start thinking about this with the understanding that the landscape is changing day by day. What I hope we're going to do today is look at some use cases for large language models in research for ourselves as well as our communities, to consider how generative AI may be a research partner for us, to consider the future search tools and future database experiences that are developing relating to AI, to introduce retrieval augmented generation or RAG and consider why it matters in search, to launch a conversation about academic honesty relating to research, students and community members, and to discuss library strategies for leadership. Along the way, of course, I'm a librarian, we are going to share resources. Heraclitus once famously said, "No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he's not the same man." And that is true as we're trying to keep up with how generative AI is changing the search environment as well as the environment for work and creativity. In fact, we're not the same person twice because we're learning more about affordances and constraints, and we're evaluating tools, and we're hopefully being the human in the loop at all times. But I contend that this is the right time for us to get ready to lead. AI literacy and the new research strategies that are emerging are right in a school librarian's wheelhouse, or pretty much any librarian's wheelhouse. So today we're going to consider how we might pack a new research tool belt which considers AI as a collaborator. I want you to know that the tools we're talking about today are not the only ones out there. I'm going to cover a small number of them. I've gathered a number more that I recommend in a kind of petting zoo. So if we're talking about research in this presentation and you're really more interested in art and design or presentation tools or writing tools or tools for teaching, they will be included in the petting zoo. In fact, an even larger version is available on this HyperDoc, which I've been trying to keep up with, which has a table of contents that you may find useful on the left side. If you know me, of course, these are also going to be supplemented by dynamic playlists, which I'm trying hard to keep up with, and they'll be embedded through most of my courses. So let's get started. I think right now this is an important time not to bury our heads and act like ostriches. But if we are going to be ostriches, we might consider this type of approach. This is a leading ostrich. How can we be a leader? How can we invite generative AI into the inquiry process using the content that we already trust and acting as an assistant when we use large language models and other tools that are really designed to support research that are now using AI. What I believe librarians need to be up to is building knowledge rather than fear, and also considering how we can overcome equity and opportunity gaps. This is something we're always concerned about. For me, I follow a number of thought leaders. This group is growing, but these are the ones I go to most often. And this is a group that is a combination of academics like Ethan Malik, of K-12 educators like Matt Miller, Holly Clark, and Dan Fitzpatrick, and Eric Kurtz, Monica Burns, and also librarians like Nicole Hennig and Erin Tay. These are people that I think are well worth following, and I hope that you'll click on the links to their websites and profiles. The fact is, our students are going to need to work symbiotically with AI tools. They're going to need these tools for search, for knowledge management, and for creativity. I have a model that I've been playing with and that I hope I live up to in the courses I teach. I'm looking for my students to present their work with transparency and honesty. I'm looking for my students to do validation and verification along their journeys with search, research, and inquiry, so that they understand that all information needs to be interrogated, including output from AI. That they understand when we value creativity and originality, and that there is reflection on the process. If you're using an AI tool, how effective was it? How much of it did you use? What parts of the project did you use it for? Of course, we're also considering AI as a new literacy. In what ways is AI literacy connected to those other literacies that we work with patrons around or work with students around? Information literacy, media literacy, news literacy, data literacy, global literacy, digital literacy. I'm sure I've missed a couple, but how are all these connected and where does AI literacy fit in? And we'll be working on this over years to figure this out. I scanned the literature, and I don't want to necessarily read these bullet points for you, but AI literacy seems is becoming an essential literacy, and the need for it is becoming more pervasive. Might we embed these skills into, if we're working in K-12 or academic, our portraits of a graduate? Among the definitions and the elements of AI literacy are understandings of the basic concepts and technologies, critical evaluation of AI platform systems and their outputs, using AI to responsibly discover, solve problems, and co-create, communicate effectively about AI with others, reflect on its use. We talked about that a minute ago. Consider ethical implications of AI on work, creativity, culture, politics, the economy. Consider how the tools support learning and creativity and productivity in the workplace. There are many frameworks. I'm showing you the Digital Promise framework as just one example. I like the way this particular framework looks at ethics and impact and information and misinformation dissemination as part of a framework. But you'll see in the other resources that I mentioned earlier, multiple frameworks, and you can find the one that you think fits your work best. Among the things to consider, of course, are the sources of the data set. Remembering garbage in, garbage out, looking for gaps in content and in currency. Fact checking, which is something we do with any output or result list. The notion of equity, who's able to use AI, who isn't, what is AI including and what is it not including. We're, of course, concerned with privacy and security in any setting, but especially when we're working with young people. We're looking at information quality. We're looking at bias. We're going to be covering that in 530. We're looking at and 575. We're looking at the shifts in practice. In what way is practice as an information professional or as an educator shifting, and our students' careers as well. I like this article by Mary Ellen Bates. Those of you who are in 530 will recognize her name. She said in an article in Computers and Libraries, just as we used to explain inverted indexes and control vocabularies to our users when introducing them to a bibliographic database, now we need to explain the importance of developing chatbot prompts that do more than confirm our unconscious biases. As generative AI becomes ubiquitous, it is crucial that librarians and search professionals are seen as AI whisperers as well as research superheroes. What I'm seeing as I record this is there is a de facto migration of pretty much everybody I know to using AI in one way or another. Sometimes people aren't even aware that they're using AI. For instance, if they're using Grammarly or any kind of learning tool, AI may already be embedded in it. But in fact, students are using it. Adults are using it. It's being used heavily in the workplace, even though it might not be endorsed or it might not be taught about it's happening. There's also a de facto transition away from some other tools to AI tools. And I think what's happening is that we need to keep up with wherever this stuff is going and lead in its thoughtful and ethical and effective use. If you are planning to work in schools, you ought to be aware, or with young people, you ought to be aware of the regulations that are out there that relate to children and young people's use of technology. Some of these relate to students and children who are 13 and under, or under 13, and some of these relate to folks who are 18 and over, and you need to take a look at terms of use for many of the tools that you might be tempted to be using. Consider parent permission if that's appropriate, but be aware, especially of COPPA, the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which imposes requirements on operators of websites or online services directed to children under 13 that have actual knowledge that they are collecting personal information online from a child under 13. That's important. And the very recent, this is, as I'm recording this, is going through Congress, the Kids Online Safety Act that would require online services, including social media, video games, and messaging apps, to take reasonable measures to prevent minors from such harms as online bullying, harassment, sexual exploitation, self-harm, and predatory marketing. Even if the rest of your organization, institution, association is unaware of these, as a librarian, these regulations are important for you to pay attention to and inform your community about. A couple of recent studies talk about the level of use that is happening relating to young people and adults relating to AI. In fact, this one from Common Sense Media, the Berkman School at Harvard, and a couple of other sources are saying that 53% of young people are getting information from generative AI tools. This is ages 14 through 22. 31% are using it in image creation, 46% help with schoolwork, 51% as brainstorming tools, and 16% to help them make music. There are studies that are talking, this is a Microsoft study about AI in education, are talking about people's main concerns, and this chart is divided by the people who are concerned: leaders, educators, and students. And you can see that they are concerned about a variety of things, among them plagiarism, lack of IT resources and technical expertise, ensuring equitable access, insufficient training, and becoming overly dependent on these tools. So feel free to take a look at the number of studies that are emerging. I'm gonna flip through these. The slides will be available. This one's on chatbots in schools, and it was created by the Walton Foundation in conjunction with the Learning Engineering Virtual Institute. And this one, I believe, is from the same source about statistics relating to schools and use of AI. If you are in schools, it's important to know there is a couple of different things happen. There are student-facing tools that students are either embracing on their own or being introduced to by educators. And then there are a lot of tools that are really aimed at educators and librarians and just professionals. Many of them have to do with instructional design. Others have to do with presentation, writing support. So there are some things we use with kids, and then there are some things that support our own productivity and creativity. Two statements keep running through my head as I think about this use. One is, and these are programming tools or IT tools, always keep the human or the student in the loop. And GIGO, which is an old programming acronym that I learned long ago: garbage in, garbage out. The output is only as good as what you put into the system. And let's keep that in mind with our students. However, I think what's really important to know, especially regarding inquiry and search, is that there is a toolkit that, if you're in 530, you're learning about at the beginning of the semester, that has to do with control vocabulary and keywords and developing a very sophisticated query if you're going to be an information professional. Now, I think that doesn't get in the way of improved ability to really consider meanings of words rather than the literal word itself. And so what AI tools do give us is the ability to conduct semantic search and develop prompts that are not necessarily tied to an individual word or phrase. And I'll talk about what I mean by this. So there are toolkits. This is the toolkit that I've introduced to you in 530 that are traditional strategies for serious searchers. Progrowing and citation training and predicting file types and using peripheral vision, author searching, limiters and filters, and building blocks and checking references, old friends, and all of that stuff. That still is useful. And we have stuff that we're adding to our toolkit. So if you think about keyword search as that traditional method of information retrieval that involves matching exact words and phrases, this is heavily dependent on the user's ability to choose the right keywords and control vocabulary. So very often our users struggle with synonyms and multiple words with the same meanings. Now, semantic search uses AI and natural language processing to understand the intent and contextual meaning of a search query. So it tries to improve accuracy by understanding the searcher's intent and the contextual meaning to understand, interpret, and predict what the user is looking for, going beyond that keyword matching. So it offers a dynamic and it offers personalized results. In fact, you can have a conversation with your result list based on, and it responds to your past behavior. So think about the differences and how semantic search might enhance and not necessarily replace keyword search. This is just a chart from Gemini that reflects the difference, which you can take a look at on your own. I think what's important here is perhaps this example. So in Gemini, my prompt was, what is the best restaurant in New York City? And a keyword search might return results based on the exact words, best restaurant in New York City. However, a semantic search would consider synonyms for best, like top, excellent, and it might also suggest related terms like fine dining or popular. So a semantic search, as Gemini explains, offers a more advanced and intuitive approach to search. Well, I'm not going to dwell on these two next slides in this presentation. I want you to be aware of the affordances and constraints of using large language models for academic search. We've talked a little bit already about semantic search and topic clustering as another advantage, answer generation, summarization, integration, the ability for these things to be multimodal, searching sound and video and audio, and personalization. And in the constraints area, of course, we're always concerned about accuracy, reliability, source credibility, bias, ethical and privacy concerns, ethical use, over-reliance, and worried about skill erosion and dependency. But I want you to think about this on a regular basis as these tools are introduced in your life, in your future life. Be the librarian, be the person who has a critical stance. What I want to move on to is how we can leverage these tools in really positive ways as we see changes in the environment. So I want you to think about it in this way, especially as we use these tools for corpi of information. I think that's how you would say it, that we actually trust. Where we've always used Control F as a tool for finding words and phrases in content and in result lists, as well as articles or our own writing or our own files. Let's imagine that large language models give us the opportunity to use a kind of Control F for concepts and ideas. And I really think this is a powerful concept if we think about using these tools in this particular way. So let's look at some examples. What I'm presenting now is use cases for generative AI across the large language models. If you don't know this, a large language model is a type of artificial intelligence that's trained on massive amounts of text data, and more than text data now, to understand and generate human language. These models use deep learning techniques, specifically neural networks, to learn patterns and relationships within data. So, these are the ones that are currently popularly being used, and we'll take a look at some of their output. This is from AI for Education. This is a nice chart. There are many out there. Aaron Tay has done a number of them on the academic level, but these are the current features as I'm recording of some of the major large language models. I want you to note that a number of these had not been available for use with young people before, but Gemini is now available for ages 13 and over. What we're also seeing is changes, and we'll look at this when we are in our Google unit. If you're in 530 with me, we're looking at things that are currently in Google Labs, for instance, the Search Generative Experience. And you can sign up for that, and that will be a layer over your Google. So if you see that little test tube, that's a beaker, I guess, up there, that's under the circle. When you sign up for it in Labs, at this point, this is what you will see in your Google environment, in your Google results. And this is what it looks like when I did the search, what causes leaves to change color in fall. So you see that you're getting the AI overview. Up there, you're getting a list of discussions and forums, which may or may not have value. And you're getting some decent websites, like from the Smithsonian and the Park Services, and I guess we're getting another forum in terms of Reddit. And then we also get other people ask and some other tips, including something that looks like AI's knowledge graph. We're seeing this come into the Microsoft platform in Copilot with a 13 plus preview program, which by the time you listen to this is likely to be common. In 2024, we saw the debut of OpenAI. It was a bit controversial, but it was also incredibly impressive. It's not meant for children under 13. But I hope that you'll get a chance to take a look at that video, which in fact, in some cases, in some of the elements were just stunning in terms of its capability. Among the things that it revealed was this multimodal ability to process and generate responses across text, audio, video. They showed a real-time conversation across multiple languages that was so fluid. They show it was released as a free tool. It is incredibly fast. It has a user experience that crosses your devices. The O in ChatGPT 4.0 stands for Omni, which refers to that multimodal capability. In addition to the things I mentioned before, it also analyzes data and creates charts. It has visual capabilities for problem solving. It sings, and it has a variety of GPTs, just like there are these extensions in some of the browsers we use. There are a variety of GPTs that search different parts of the corpus in the GPT store. There is an element of it. One of the chats is Search GPT, which really looks at a corpus of scholarly content and helps us have conversations with articles. And this is an image of the types of GPTs you'll find. I like Consensus. We'll take another look at it as an individual tool. You see you can use DALL-E, which is the image generation tool that is just spectacular. You can use Scholar GPT, or it will partner with Canva as well. So from ChatGPT 4.0, you can access multiple other GPTs. This is just a peek at what Scholar looks like within ChatGPT 4.0. A number of people prefer Claude to many of the other large language models. I am a fan of it as well, although it doesn't search the web in the way that some of the others do. I really like the way it remembers what you're doing, groups things together, invites collaboration. And I also like its prompt library. You can see how big this prompt library is. One of my worries is that if we over-rely on the large language models as they evolve, we might miss things. We might miss things like Google Books. If we're in the Gemini environment, we might not go to the specific Google searches. We might miss Google Scholar. We might miss trends. And so keep that in mind. In fact, one of the concerns, Cory Doctorow, who you may know for many reasons, a scholar, someone who's been advancing and considering technology since the beginning of the internet, a blogger, talks about the dangers and how it will change Google. When Google substitutes its own summaries for links to pages, it creates innumerable opportunities to charge publishers for preferential placement in those summaries. This is true of any algorithmic feed. While such feeds are important, even vital, for making sense of large amounts of information, they can also be used to play a high-speed shell game that makes suckers out of the rest of us. When you trust someone to summarize the truth for you, you become terribly vulnerable to their self-serving lies. In an ideal world, these intermediaries would be fiduciaries with your solemn and legally binding duty to put your interest ahead of their own. So Cory Doctorow speaks about this, and think about what we might be losing as we lose Google's vertical result list, which we've relied on for many years to present a variety of results. Now, the problem is not a lot of people go through those results, but Doctorow's warning, I think, is really important to consider. Now, let's really go into those use cases. The Open Access Group, AI and Inquiry, have suggested the following ways that teachers might integrate AI tools into the inquiry process. And you can see this is a wonderful chart and something that you might look at with students. Of course, generating questions, developing background information, prompt engineering, research planning, and summarizing. A lot of the things we've looked at a little bit. But now let's see some use cases. This is an example of a colleague of mine who's going to be writing a book, and he wanted to write a book, not a different kind of collective biography, on how individual couples who have romantic relationships have furthered knowledge or created things that were pretty wonderful. But the notion of romantic couple or married couple or partners is a hard one to express using keywords and control vocabulary. Using a prompt of famous couples across different subject disciplines whose contributions were a result of their collaborations, which was a kind of refinement of a prompt that I actually entered, actually resulted in a nice little grouping, either by field or geography. And there were things I would have come up with Pierre and Marie Curie, perhaps. I would have come up with Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. But a lot of these I would not have come up with without this kind of semantic search facility of a large language model. Another example is imagining I'm a high school student looking for poems to analyze by Latina poets. And I'm using Gemini. Notice the idea that it has more than one synthesis here. It's 3 possible drafts. And I look at all 3, and I've come up with a really nice list. But not only a nice list, it gives me examples of the poet's most famous or notable works. I've used this as a LibGuide booster. For instance, in this case, I'm an academic librarian building a LibGuide for a graduate English course studying romantic poetry. And I ask specific information formats, suggest portals, library databases, primary source books, images, criticism, biography, and video to include. And it did a darn good job, and I saved myself. I asked it also, my follow-up was give me the URLs for these things, and my follow-up was absolutely fabulous. And it, I would have spent many more hours creating the beginning of the LibGuide than I would if I had used this as a LibGuide booster. And it also has a privacy promise, and that's one of the things I like about Claude, although because it doesn't search the web, it may not have as current data set. Imagining I was a scholar or an AP U.S. history student looking for primary sources relating to the beginnings of the American Civil War, I asked for portals that had primary sources, and it gave me some really excellent research portals, the ones that I actually tend to rely on my own, but might not have gathered as quickly as this one did. And in this case, I asked for primary sources to help me discover which 20th century president did the most to promote civil rights, and it gave me many documents relating to Lyndon Johnson's efforts, and that might lead me in a direction that would be promising in making an argument. Another promising ideas for research, in this case I asked which Supreme Court cases addressed students' rights, and it did a fine job listing the cases, and you can see I chose more than one large language model. I actually tend to do this. I tend to use my tabs to keep multiple large language models open and compare the output among them as I look at my results. In this one, I'm looking for the best portals for researching the war in Gaza from both political and historic perspectives. And there were some things here that I thought were really useful that I might not have thought of. For instance, JSTOR Daily, which is one that I used often with high school students, and university portals for Middle East studies that I thought were really exceptional as well. Here, after asking for case studies that had to do with economics and current history, I asked for research questions connected to each of this suggested case studies, and it did a fine job. Look at the variety. Tesla's impact on the automotive industry, the rise of renewable energy, the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, Volkswagen's emissions scandal. These were wonderful examples, and now I not only have the examples and the case studies that was in the previous output, but the questions about them. In this case, I was using Microsoft's Copilot, and I had a question actually from a religious studies faculty member who wanted to know how he might apply generative AI in student research in his comparative religions course. And among the things we talked about was the themes that he had across religions. So the prompt here was compare a variety of sacred texts from major faiths and address the subject of the afterlife, including quotes from each of the sacred texts. And it did a really fine job. And when it came, it was interesting. We noticed that Judaism was missing, and we asked why, and we got an answer that we expected, because of course there was no real firm pictures of the afterlife in the Old Testament. And then we asked anyway for mentions or references, and it did come up with some additional things that we were hoping that it would, including references to, for instance, Elijah. I played with using generative AI, in this case Gemini, for a controlled vocabulary. So I was looking for vocabulary in the various thesauri, ERIC, PsycInfo, and MESH, for ADHD. And yes, there was a variation across them. There were some similar subject headings, but this is a really good way to ensure that you're covering all of the various ways that the various disciplines might describe an issue without necessarily having to make stops in every one of the thesauri. Here's what the search looked like in Claude, and you can see a little bit more of the differences there across the thesauri. Similarly, for Reader's Advisory, not necessarily a research topic, one of the things I noticed was that the subject heading, there wasn't yet a subject heading for Afrofuturism in terms of a genre. And so I looked for lists. First, I did an annotated list of Afrofuturist books. Then I wanted to make sure they were award-winning, and then I wanted to make sure they were well-reviewed, and the list got refined, and it was a pretty decent list. You might use generative AI tools. This one's ChatGPT 4.0, I believe, for cataloging. And notice that I was trying to catalog a record for genderqueer, and it gave me, I think, I'm not an expert, it gave me a pretty good record. But not only that, because these tools can do coding, I was able to get an XML file that I might be able to upload into my catalog. Did the same thing in Claude and got MARC and RDA records for John Shu's The Gift of Story. And for those of you who are catalogers, you can tell me whether or not these were adequate. In many cases, we're going to have patrons and students who may not be able to manage text complexity, possibly because English isn't their first language, for a variety of other reasons. You can enter documents and have the documents reduced to, say, a text for a 5th grade level reader. And similarly, although I am not an expert, this is a Ukrainian translation of, I believe this was my Afrofuturism search. There are some tools that are designed for academic search. One of my favorite thought leaders, Aaron Tay, keeps a really good, up-to-date list of those tools. Bard, you'll notice, is not there, but no longer with us, but generally his are up to date. I keep up with them in our AI search tools collections on Pearl Trees. But we're seeing an awful lot of good materials coming up. We are also seeing issues relating to plagiarism. This New York Times case was out for quite a while. New York Times was suggesting that AI was scraping its proprietary content, and at this moment, I don't know what the resolution was, but we are following the issues of intellectual property relating to large language models and proprietary content. And one thing that librarians have to be keeping an eye on is retrieval augmented generation, which is also referred to as RAG. This author, Rachel Hendrick, who wrote in Choice, is a librarian or has an MLIS degree, and discusses her take on RAG. It helps users refine their prompt and also allows users to choose a data set. And we're talking about not necessarily the end user, but the people who are owning the corpus. And so in this case, they're looking at Perplexity, and they're using the Perplexity bot within Claude to look at the social consequences of Supreme Court cases decided in April 24. Now, although Claude doesn't go out and search the web and may not be as up to date as all that, when you suggest in Perplexity the corpus, for instance, Supreme Court cases, you're going to get the answers that you want because you are controlling where the bot is searching or where the bot is pulling from and making the connections. So there are a lot of limitations to generative AI, but RAG is pretty powerful. It begins to address the concerns of the academic community, and it's a step toward creating an LLM tool that is actually useful for higher ed. It's the difference between generative AI for fun, according to the author here, and generative AI as a legitimate research tool. And I think we need to keep an eye on that as librarians. This is a diagram of what RAG looks like. The user submits a prompt. It goes to the large language model. The large language model submits the query to the data source, and then it comes back with content. You're able to use the affordances of the large language model using the corpus, the specific or the specified corpus of data, and that makes a big difference. A recent article in Computers in Libraries talked about conversational AI agents, again, something to keep an eye on. This one also mentions the inclusion of RAG in these futuristic tools that use AI for research. This is an example of an explanation, 3 drafts of the explanation of what RAG is in Gemini. You ask a question, the AI model uses its internal knowledge to understand the question. The model searches the external database for the information related to your question, and then AI combines the knowledge, takes what it's learned from both sources to answer your question. And so I think this is going to be really powerful. As I mentioned before, one of the tools that uses AI and RAG very effectively is Perplexity. This is one of the large language model tools that scholars are beginning to use very heavily. Notice that you can focus on an academic corpus. You can use the computational search engine here, Wolfram Alpha, and you can even go into chats or forums like Reddit. And here's an example of the impact of high school librarians on first-year college students. Notice that it is pulling documents. You can see the sources of the documents. You can see the databases from which it's grabbing content. And you can see summarizations and answers as determined by the bot. This is another example of Perplexity using RAG. In this case, it's share a variety of soliloquies from female characters in Shakespeare's tragedies for me to compare. It is going into the corpus of Shakespeare content. It is suggesting tragedies and soliloquies. It's giving me accent, scene, and even quotes. But many of the major publishers are experimenting and integrating AI tools, and I think we're going to begin to see big differences. Here you're seeing EBSCO, Thomson Reuters, ProQuest, Elsevier, Web of Science. And so look out for this. This is coming into a database near you. If you're in 530, you already saw how JSTOR allows for a text analyzer. You bring a paper in, you bring your own paper in, and it analyzes the text and how it helps you find like papers or subject headings, and it helps you with these sliders move things around and decide I want more academic library mention in an article, less high school mention. So you can use the locators, the people, and these post-search filters or facets, and you can also use those sliders. But what's happening right now is that you can get involved in a beta of JSTOR's generative AI tool, and this works within articles right now, but it's going to work within the search in JSTOR, and I think it's going to be very, very powerful. So you'll be able to use the Control F, if you will, to search JSTOR's huge corpus, and it's interdisciplinary. There'll be a Voices of Search video that you may see soon. And there's some screenshots of what this might look like in the slide deck. In this case, I searched the rise and fall of the bagel, actually the history of the bagel. I got this article, and notice that I can ask questions. What is this text about? Recommend topics for me to look at, show me related questions, or even ask questions of the article itself, and they'll be generated. And I think this is really powerful to save the researcher time for the new researcher, and it is using a database that we all know, love, and trust, and adding features that allow us to dig deeper and understand more. In the case of Gale, they have been doing webinars of how to use large language models and other AI tools to prepare for research within its Gale products. And so you might want to take a look at this particular webinar. In this case, the webinar leader was suggesting that the students find out more about westward expansion and the various subtopics and whether it was good. What are the searches I might try? And so ChatGPT 4.0 suggested, hey, why don't you look at material related to manifest destiny, the positive effects of westward expansion, and gives you some words to look for: the Oregon Trail and its pioneers, the Homestead Act, Native American displacement. So these terms may not have immediately come to mind for the researcher, but now before they go into the Gale product, they actually have a vocabulary and some suggested subject headings if they match. Notice that Gale points to this in its use of ChatGPT 4.0. When conducting searches, make use of reputable sources such as academic journals, history books, and primary documents to ensure the accuracy and reliability of your information. And that was something that was generated by ChatGPT 4.0, and it leads us right to the databases, and I kind of like that piece of advice. For academics and actually for high-level high school students, the Lit Review may be a thing. Lit reviews as well as graphical representations, literature maps of how papers are connected. And so it might be a good idea for you to take a look at some of these if you're working with high-level researchers. This is a list of citation mapping tools and visualizing tools. This is Aaron Tay's list of such tools. Another one of the things that you might want to take a look at, especially if you're doing a ProQuest with us in 530, is ProQuest dissertations. We sometimes don't really recognize the value of dissertations in general research. Bring a dissertation up, and you will be able to get a good lit review to examine. But in this case right now, if you look at the AI functionality, which you can enable in ProQuest dissertations, you see the seed document, the document that you found. And then along the right column, you see related research. You see seminal research, similar dissertations, and you're getting leads that are really helpful if you're serious about a research. It is finding the citation connections, and so you almost have like a family tree for any dissertation that you will pull up. When you do look at things like connected papers, you'll see that this type of tool gives you a Spotify type of approach to the way papers are connected. And you're going to see this in an awful lot of these tools. And if you're working in an academic library, I think these are going to be invaluable. Open Knowledge Maps is another one. And Elicit, which I think is a brilliant and helpful database that is AI driven, like Perplexity. This is one of my favorites. It really does a lot of work in terms of analysis, and you'll see here it is. There's no age restriction. You can search for research papers, and you get abstracts, other relevant papers. You can organize these papers into tables. It is really, really useful in a kind of full service way. I mentioned consensus earlier in this search tool, which identifies disagreements and looks at various viewpoints in research. You get a comparison, a summary, and where people agree and disagree. And you can filter in a number of ways by types of studies, by types of journals. Is it going to be Research One? What's its ranking in its field, and of course by year. And then this is what it looks like when you get in. You get the summary, you get a consensus meter, you get some evaluations within, in this case, Microsoft Copilot. Here you see the methods, and you get to look at articles in a very different way. And here you see some of the consensus. And note that This tool, like a few of its companions, will also cite these works and give you study snapshots and give you evaluations. Is it highly cited? What type of study is it? As I mentioned before, this stuff has great value in research. You also have helpful research assistance. I have a little Pearl trees on that. These will explain papers, summarizing tools, allow you to interact with PDFs, and Brave. I like Brave as a summarizer, and also a tool that finds research and gives you citations. I want to just briefly mention some instructional tools that I think have value in terms of research. There's a huge number of them in the Pearl trees that you're looking at in the little box. I love Matt Miller's work, and he often gives you top 10 lists, and this one, top 40 lists for teachers. A lot of these are things I use on a regular basis. They're brilliant, but we don't have the room for those today. But I do want to show you that there is Microsoft work, Search Progress and Search Coach. These are AI-driven tools like the Reading Progress and Reading Coach that are actually enclosed areas where students will be able to soon use Copilot, and you can actually get in and see a student's research project from beginning to end, look at their searches, compare their searches to other students in the class, see what they missed, see what they're prioritizing in what they've selected from a result list, and get AI feedback in terms of how you might evaluate them. Recently, you can watch these, it uses Bing Safe Search, but I understand they're going to be using Copilot. And in addition, you're going to have a tool that actually looks at students' speeches and gives them coaching relating to developing a speech and delivering it. I love Presto. For those of us who are writing research prompts, this actually, although it's aimed at K-12, it works nicely if you stay at 12th grade for prompts that will be undergraduate. So writing prompts, in this case, I looked at invasive species. They have, imagine, in this case, I looked for 8th grade and I wanted an op-ed. Imagine you're a biologist studying the effects of an invasive species on your local ecosystem. Describe in detail how the species has been disruptive and what possible solutions might be implemented. There really are some very creative prompts that come out of Presto. I love scaffolding with and differentiating and translation from Diffit, one of my very favorite tools. In this case, I'm asking it to explain Russia's war in Ukraine using articles from the New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal. It is linking me to the articles, giving me an adapted passage, coming up with a variety of types of questions I might ask, and open-ended prompts and strategic thinking and extended thinking. But not only that, there's more. It will give me all sorts of scaffolds into which I can dump the prompts and the material that is developed by Diffit. There are lesson plan tools that will create inquiry types of lessons. One of my favorites is Curipod. This one is, again, on the environment. And what it generated for me was questions and activities that were around an inquiry project. And its output is in a slide deck. And the slide deck, you can have it connect to any kinds of standards that you're looking for. Recently, Padlet created a tool where it will use AI to create these boards. In this case, I wanted primary sources of the Gilded Age for AP US History, but I also am able to do a prompt and have Padlet generate a map of the civil rights movement that's interactive for me, with which my students can also post on top of it. So there are really wonderful researchy type applications within the AI new facilities of Padlet. There are a number of, I call them magic Swiss Army knife tools for learning and teaching. Among them are Magic School AI. These allow you to do loads of different things within. This is Educational Copilot. Education Copilot, you can see I can build quizzes and lessons, and I just generate ideas and ideas for student projects and reports. And this is my example of creating a whole unit on the Trail of Tears just using Copilot. I would never use this straight out of the box, but it is a great starting point for a 10-day unit. EduAid AI is another one that is one in that Swiss Army knife kind of category. School AI, this actually gives you all sorts of tools for teaching AI and for professional development. And of course, Khan Academy now has Khanmigo, which is free to U.S. educators and has wonderful lessons on AI. Brisk Teaching is another one that works with Chrome in the browser. And from your browser, you can, it interacts with Chrome, you can do all sorts of building of instructional materials. If you're an educator, you must play with these things. Prompt crafting is going to be a very important new skill. I'm not going to be able to go deeply into this, but the Pearl Trees here is loads of ideas, and there are so many models which really will help you learn how to prompt effectively. Now let's just finish up with how academic honesty is going to look in an AI environment. Some of you who are as old as I am may remember this example of science fiction, Danny Dunn and the Homework Machine. Well, we don't want our students' use of AI to have an ATM kind of effect. That's not what we're looking for. We are also not in the mood, or we are not interested in having no transparency relating to student use of AI. And so I think what we have to do is not only write policies for our courses, but also for each assessment, and regularly review and evolve as AI changes and our schools change and it becomes available to various different groups and becomes better. And so we want academic honesty, but it is nuanced. We may not want everything to be completely done without AI. In fact, there are a number of models. I prefer, as you probably know, reflection at the end of a project, and tell me how you used AI and when it was valuable and when it wasn't. But we're also seeing other models. This is from Holly Clark. It looks kind of similar to what I've been doing in terms of transparency, accuracy, and really valuing the process over the product, or maybe both, but really considering the process. You can find the various different guidelines that states are using for AI in this document, and I think you'll find some valuable language here. Among my favorite guidelines is North Carolina. They've done an awful lot of thinking for various grades, PK to 5, 6 to 8, 9 to 13. It's going to look different at the various different grade levels. These are just examples. This is what North Carolina is recommending in the elementary level, in the middle grade level, and at the high school level. And so you can see that there is going to be a lot more use of AI tools, of course, in the 13 plus level. This is another document, pedagogy.ai, again, sharing state-by-state guidelines. And this is an example from my course, and this is about my reflection. So if that helps you, please use it. The fact is, all information should be interrogated. I see no reason why we can't use Michael Caulfield's SIFT model with AI output, focusing on stop, investigating the source, find better coverage, trace claims. All of this can be done with the AI output we get. In fact, I asked ChatGPT 4.0 how I might use SIFT to evaluate generative AI content, and take a look at that. And I think that'll give you some guidelines for working with students if you are working with students. Source lists should be interrogated, and that is definitely a way for which we can keep academic honesty going on in our classes. We could suggest that students use generative AI tools that definitely show where the content is coming from. We can decide what's acceptable when. Are we going to have, if we are educators, is AI use acceptable when we're brainstorming, when we're finding lists of sources, when we're summarizing reading content, when we're outlining, when we're creating rough drafts? This is going to be varied depending upon who's teaching, who is, who's educated, who's the instructor you're working with as you're working with students. What is cheating? There are a number of documents. I believe this one is from Matt Miller. And Matt Miller has also, he does the blog Ditch That Textbook and a number of books as well. And he has a spectrum of, when should we have the work be totally bot created, and the bottom of that is student created. And in some cases, maybe we do want total bot control, bot creation. And in some cases, we want total student creation. And in some cases, we want somewhere in between. Matt's created a slide deck on this, and I think it's brilliant, and I hope you take a look at that. John Spencer has an awful lot of work. He's another educator I follow about when to use artificial AI. And then there are a number of kind of traffic light approaches, also spectrums. In this case, Edutopia is looking at a numerical approach. But you'll see that this is one of the first studies. Leon Furs is in this, and Michael Perkins, on navigating AI using a traffic light approach. I cleaned up this with the author's permission. I cleaned this up and presented this AI assessment scale. And you can use this if you're an educator and maybe think about what's green and what's red for each assignment or somewhere in the middle. This one is by Ryan Watkins. He created a Google form, and you do your input and it will create a traffic light document for you to use with classes. Edutopia also talked about the stoplight model. So there's an awful lot of material here. Lance Eaton has been collecting classroom policies for use of generative AI tools, and they're across the disciplines. Most of them are at the academic level. While I don't know how much I would cite AI, because what I try to do is find AI that has documents in it that I can go to, so I'd go to the original documents. But if you want to cite AI, the major style guides offer some help, and the major tools and also citation generators are out there working on this. So here are some links to those. And there are detection tools. Here are some of them, but I really warn, as many of my colleagues have, that false positives are common. You don't want to get into an argument with a student who has work that is honestly created and present a false positive from an AI detection tool. In fact, as I mentioned, Ethan Mollick is one of my thought leader heroes, and he says do not rely on AI detectors for classroom use. I like this International Baccalaureate School policy. I think it's really forward-thinking, and it was one of the first ones that came out. I think about the use of AI as not encouraging students to have AI completed work, but AI assisted or perhaps AI launched work. And I love AJ Giuliani's description of this. He's been doing a lot of thinking about this. And if you're an educator, you may want to think about the difference between the two and perhaps the Venn diagram center around the two. So take a look at that if you get a chance. And these are the sorts of things that you want to consider in your libraries and in your classrooms if you're teaching. What's in terms of your decisions relating to those traffic lights and your policies. So to complete this little long lecture, we're in the midst of a whirlwind, and the landscape will continue to shift. I think what we need to do is encourage transparency and focus on the process. Engage in more flipping, perhaps have students do some of the active work in the classroom and maybe some of the reading and research at home. We can acknowledge policies that we establish right now may need to be revised, and maybe semester by semester. We can avoid the punitive gotchas and talk about cultures of academic honesty instead. And as librarians, it's our duty to explore and to innovate and to model. And so I just leave you with some of the tools that we have here. I'll be continuing to keep up this petting zoo and this hyperdoc. And thank you for staying with me for this rather long lecture. I hope it's been helpful.